Welcome to Complex Creatures, exploring spirituality and the common good.
I remember when I was in seminary, I studied all kinds of interesting things. Big word things, big ideas, concepts like ontology and metaphysics, ethics, aesthetics, epistemology. Lots of big words that get most people at dinner parties to roll their eyes at you. But it wasn't until I found myself in an evening course on the philosophy of Søren or Obu Kierkegaard. That's right, I said Kierkegaard, because in Danish it's not pronounced Kierkegaard, as you probably often hear it in America. It wasn't until I studied the philosophy of this particular 19th century Danish philosopher that I then became an evangelist for school, for the seminary experience, because there's something about the way that Kierkegaard writes and thinks that gets under your skin. It breaks free of just the intellectual ideas and narrations that happen in philosophy, and it asks you to think about life lived in the presence of death and finitude. Our lives are not necessary. We're going to die. We only have so much time. What will you do with your life? I remember driving home every evening that I had this class and talking to my friend who was having his own crisis of faith, and it was existential. It went deep. I mean, he had a crisis of sense of community and faith and love. And I kept saying, you got to come to seminary. You got to pack up and quit your job and come study, even though he didn't want to go into the ministry. So seminary is really not a great financial idea. But I was so convinced he needed to be under the tutelage of our professor, Christopher Ben Simpson, and who's now a priest and a wonderful friend. And he needed to hear his teaching on the philosophy and life of this guy named Kierkegaard, or Kierkegaard. I have always been moved by and challenged. And that's why I'm excited today to introduce you to J. Aaron Simmons, a full professor at Furman. He's a philosopher, and he's done a lot of other cool things in life. He's got a new book out called Camping with Kierkegaard, Faithfulness as a Way of Life. He loves to fish and hike and camp, and that's what his book's all about. It's about who he wants to become in this life, the short time of life that he has. He really wants to live inspired by philosophers like Kierkegaard. He doesn't just want to teach it and think it and write about it and live in the rat race of a workaday world. No, he wanted, after going through the experiences of COVID, he wanted to better apply it and live. And not just to be better and more fulfilled as an individual. He wanted to be a better father and husband and friend because that's the kind of person he wants to become with the time that he has. And he thinks that Kierkegaard is a wonderful guide and friend to help get us there. I hope you enjoy this interview for our podcast, Complex Creatures, where we explore spirituality not only as a tool for yourself, but for the common good. Give this interview a listen, and always share with your friends. Hey, listen, man, let me dive in by asking you I'm recording an introduction at a different time.
Yep.
What I hope to do is just have a nice conversation with you and let it go where it goes. The podcast is called Complex Creatures, and kind of the angle is just, I look at spiritual tools, disciplines, traditions, and try to, and wherever I can explore those things beyond the world of personal growth, but how they can contribute to the common good. Krista Tippett wrote in Becoming Wise. There's somewhere in there she keeps asking, like, we can use spirituality to help us figure out the kind of world we want to build in the next century. I kept thinking to myself, it is an underutilized tool in thinking about the world, right? We usually just internalize it. So at any rate, so here's what I want to start. Like, listen, I think your book's really rad, by the way.
Appreciate it.
I find there's a couple things that just jump out at me. One is you're kind of like a rock critic in there as well. Like, you have like you have another career, I think, being a rock critic, if you'd like, a music critic.
I'm so not a fan of Radiohead, man.
Okay. All right. But two, now I want to say this to you. You're probably, and you didn't say, at least I don't recall you saying it, you're probably the only person I know besides myself that knows that Cheers, Frasier, and Wings are in the same universe.
Yeah. All same universe.
I don't think you said it, but you just threw them together.
Yep.
And I use that as like a party factoid. I'm like, guess what? 3 shows are in the same universe.
Oh yeah.
So
The Wings has one episode where Frasier and Lilith come to the island. They have another episode where Norm and Cliff come to the island.
Yep.
And yeah, so it's fascinating. And then there's also weird things where it's not the same universe, but like Tony Shalhoub, who was in Wings, eventually becomes, famous in Monk, the classic TV show. There's an episode of Monk where he's on a plane and runs into what's his head? The guy who plays the Joe on Wings runs into him, and they have this whole conversation about like acting and airports and stuff. So yeah, there's all these really weird overlaps. And I never was allowed to watch Cheers as a kid because it was in a bar.
Right, and you're Pentecostal.
But, yeah, I was at Pentecost, couldn't do that. But I did get into Wings when it was on, and then Frasier kind of when it was in reruns, and Frasier became my favorite show of all time, and I sleep to it every night.
I'm a huge fan. I don't like the new stuff. Have you seen the new ones?
I'm torn. I feel about it the same way I feel about Rings of Power, where it's like I love Middle Earth so much,
yes,
that I don't think this ruins it. I think it's other things with these people, and okay, that's better than nothing. But they are not. It's not Frasier. It's just that character has returned, right? And so,
right, got it.
I kind of wish they had called it something else. Like if they had called it something like Freddy, and it was like
right.
Frasier's back, but it's really a different show now. Like.
But Aaron, I'll tell you, I don't really like it, but I still watch it. That's the thing, is I still watching them.
Same with Rings of Power. I don't think it's very good, but
But I grew up with all of them. I watched Cheers as a kid with my parents. It was just on. But let me say this.
That's hilarious.
I'm listening to a podcast I like and tell people about called 60 Songs that explains the 90s.
Oh.
And a rock critic goes through, and now he's like into the 2000s, but he did tons of songs. And the other day I listened to his episode on Zombie by Cranberries, and I liked it.
Yeah.
And it made me start listening just this week back to that old album. And of course, Dolores O'Riordan passed on a couple years back, but she has a line in her song. This is how I want to kick this question off to you. In her song, Ode to My Family.
Yeah.
And there's a line in the song that says, understand what I've become, it wasn't my design. And people everywhere think something better than I am. Understand what I've become, it wasn't my design. And when I heard that lyric, I thought of your book.
Yeah.
And I thought of the question that you're asking throughout the book, and that Kierkegaard, how do you like to go about it? You call him Kierkegaard?
I was once told, so I studied Danish at the Kierkegaard Archive up in Minnesota. And my teacher, I was finishing my doctorate and went up there and did a summer research seminar up there. But she made me promise that I would never tell anyone that I had studied Danish with her because my pronunciation was so bad. And so I am still a Kierkegaard guy because, yes, doing it like with the Kegel. Like she was like, no, stop. Don't ever pronounce it. So I actually promised her I would never try to pronounce Danish as Danish. I would make it Anglophiled, and then that way it would not be her fault.
Okay.
And so that was our deal.
Well, then we'll go with Kierkegaard. So the idea being that that we make choices in life, or maybe we don't, but we really should be asking the question of who we want to become. What do you think about that line from her lyric? Just it's kind of haunting. Her of course, her voice is haunting. Understand what I've become. It wasn't my design. How does that strike you?
Yeah. So I think I say somewhere in the book a kind of paraphrase of Jean-Paul Sartre's philosophy, which I actually heard from a Levinas scholar years ago. And so it's one of those, through the grapevine, second cousin, third removed kind of paraphrases. But it's the idea that we must make the most of what has been made of us. And I think that might be a way of getting at, how do we make sense of ourselves, given that the self we find ourselves being probably looks really different than if we had sat down 10 years ago and written out, here's the self I hope to become. We're probably going to look different than that. And that can be depressing, right? That could be anxiety inducing. Oh, I have slidden so far from what I could have been, etc. But I tend to think that in the existential tradition, this is the sort of hope that remains, is every day is the new opportunity to say, am I okay with who I'm becoming? And yes, who I am is deeply impacted by all kinds of forces that were beyond my control. If one is a meticulous providence, reformed kind of Christian, they might say, well, everything happens by design. You are exactly who God wanted you to be. I think that's false. I'm an open theist Pentecostal. And so for me, I think God stands in these spaces and says, hey, you sure you're okay with who you're becoming? You good with that? All right. Well, I'll walk with you. Could have been an easier and more interesting trail, but all right. Right. So I tend to think that we are not who we would have designed, and yet we are at every instant, at every moment, invited to do the work of being who we hope to become.
There's a line in there that you've written, if you don't like who you are, you won't like who you are becoming.
Yeah. You better change it. Better fix something. That's right.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. Well, say more about it for us. Like, if you don't like who you are, you won't like who you're becoming. This is definitely got the language of trajectory behind it, or some sort of telos, like goal, or it's really interesting to me how purposeful our lives can be when we don't live purposefully, like or directed, right? They're still going somewhere, right? Say more about some of that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So the thought is that Aristotle was right when he talks about the notion of habit constituting our character, that Augustine was right when he talks about the object of our desire determining our identity, that the philosopher Jean-Luc Marion was right when he says that we are either called beyond ourselves toward the good, or we are reflected back onto ourselves in our petty egoism. Like, all of these different versions that philosophers and theologians have been saying for thousands of years, I think can summarize as you are who you're becoming. And what that means is the self I hope to be, let's say I'm 47 now, the self I hope to be at 50 will be a result of the habits that I have cultivated at 47, right? The self I hope to be at 50 will emerge out of the desires that I allow to occupy my time and shift my priorities at 47. And so for my students, 18, 19, 20 years old in college, inviting them to realize, look, the anxiety and stress and exhaustion and self-hatred that you are almost cultivating daily, thinking that what you're doing is just, putting in the work to be successful. Well, no, what you've done is made that normal, so that then when you're 35, you won't know how to make sense of anything other than that same anxiety and stress and self-loathing that you have just narrated as what life looks like. And so for me, the big narrative that we hear about in like 1,000 different ways, that's just the way the world works. That's just the real world. All of that for me as a philosopher is almost offensive, right? It's like, no, that's the way we've let it work.
Right.
If we don't like it, change it. There's a great rap song by the rapper Bus Driver, which he's got A$AP Rock on the track as well. It's an amazing song where they basically, it's called Ego Death is the name of the track, Ego Death. And the whole idea is we can make this better, but we're not.
But we're not, right? We haven't.
But we're not. And we are acquiescing. We are growing complacent. And then we narrate that complacency as this sense of regret and resignation, right? It's like, oh, if only things were different. And like, well, freaking do something different then, right? So my sense of becoming as an existential task is to constantly invite ourselves to realize there is a trajectory. I talk about it in the book as direction. And the problem is there is no direction that can be guaranteed. It's all risky. My definition of faith just is risk with direction. And so if you are directing yourself toward a self you hope to have been, well, then you're probably today living the sort of life you'll be okay having lived. But if you're directing yourself toward a life that is likely to just mirror what you today wish were different, then you're probably just going to be as miserable 5 years from now, right? And it's not about self-help, it's about existence. It's the human condition is a contingent mess that is also marked by moments of transcendence, joy, and grace. So how is it that that becomes real? Well, you put it into practice.
That's funny. You said it's not self-help, it's about existence. And I think, there's a couple of things that I think about. I think that there's a reason why personal growth or personal development, self-help exists, because there's a fundamental need or desire in us for transformation. Like that might just be human. It might just be ingrained in all of us. I remember I had an associate minister on my staff several years ago when Jordan Peterson was becoming Jordan Peterson. And I was running into all these young adult men who had been reading him or listening to him. And I said, I didn't have the time to go and do a deep dive, but they kept coming to me and almost whispering it. In my home after a service, we'd have all the people over to have a dinner and like a party, and they'd say, hey, they pull me aside and whisper, you heard Jordan Peterson? And of course they were inspired from some of his Jungian reflections on scripture, or some of his, I think a lot of the stuff that I think is pretty good, like a lot in terms of like, here's some good advice on how to grow up and be responsible, those kinds of lectures. And it was hitting them. The thing that fascinates me most is why that's such a compelling genre, but that's another topic. But I went to him, my associate, and I said, can you go and tell me why? Just spend some time doing a dive in him. Why is he so popular? And he came back to me with a rather, kind of dry sense of humor. He goes, self-help's easier than theology. That's why.
Yes. That's fantastic.
And he was pulling on that thread that these young men or people were going, he was giving them some good life advice. And I have nothing against that. All that to say, you're hitting on something that this isn't self-help. This is about existence. What you're a philosopher reading philosophers, including Kierkegaard, and it has something to say for how you live your life. This is not just an ivory tower intellectual game, which is part of the beauty of Kierkegaard. And these other philosophers. It reminds me of Pierre Hadot's philosophy text, what's it called, as a way of life, right? These things should make a difference, right? They're not just games we play intellectually. When I was in seminary, I had a nice course on Kierkegaard, and I convinced my friend to move and come to seminary just to study one class with his professor. Wow. Because his life was in shambles. I said, you have to read Kierkegaard. And he did it. There's a lot to say there, but I'm teeing that all up to come back right to you, because you are honest and vulnerable in your book to say that there's a point in your life where you had to ask yourself, if I'm happy who I'm becoming, am I okay with this? Yeah. Life is short. Mm-hmm. Embrace your finitude, right? We're not going to live forever. Am I okay with this? Can you talk a little bit about that? It's more powerful if you just share a little bit of your story and COVID and all that. Yeah.
So let me just have I'll say one quick preface about Jordan Peterson, just so that it is on the record. I think part of why self-help is easier than theology for him is because an awful lot of good advice about adulting gets framed in quasi-misogynistic, self-important ways. And unfortunately, we have teed up people within the church in particular to think that those things are not evil. That's just good biblical models of identity. So as a kind of cryptic critique of an awful lot of white evangelicalism looking to Joe Rogan and Mark Driscoll as their theologians, I would just say, well, no wonder Jordan Peterson is going to be relevant.
Yeah.
Right? Because he's saying stuff that is smart about adulting, but doing it in ways that then allow them to not have to cultivate humility as a virtue. And humility is not a thing that a lot of people want to foster in a culture that says the more you have, the bigger you are, the louder you are, the more likely you are to be successful. So anyway, and I just want to put that plug so that no one ever think, oh, wait, you said yes to Peterson? Well,
I have caveats everywhere. I have caveats everywhere. Yeah.
I wrote an essay once with a buddy of mine called Heretics Everywhere. And it was all about like, man, if you really start looking at it, the heresy's everywhere.
Sure.
And so, yeah, caveats everywhere. Or as the rapper Open Mike Eagle puts it, that qualifiers are necessary. And so he has this track where he basically says, I'm the greatest rapper probably. Right? Like the whole thing is like all with these qualifiers. It's like, yeah, that's why he's a philosopher.
Right.
Oh, but he also raps.
Yeah,
right?
That's great.
So yeah, my story, I think is radically non-unique, except that I think maybe, as David Foster Wallace put it, I had the ability to be articulate about my own misery. And so what my story hopefully stands as is not some sort of, top of the mountain model for people still trying to climb. That would be too Hegelian for this Kierkegaard scholar. But instead, it's an attempt to say, hey, unless we are honest enough about the stories that we live, we are unlikely to recognize that there are chapters yet to be written. And so in my case, I'm the oldest of 4 kids. Both of my parents were professors, and yet because of a long string of unfortunate events, my parents left academia. My mom ended up teaching elementary school. My dad started a construction company. Like we ended up in a very different space. And alongside that, my sister got cancer at 3. My brother got diabetes at 7 or 8. So there were huge medical bills, lots of difficulty growing up, but again, not in a poor me way, but I grew up at 14, 15 being woken up by my dad saying, hey, skip school today. I need you on the job site. If anybody asks, tell them you're 16 so I don't get in trouble, right? Like, so I was working construction 14, 15 years old. And that matters because, all that to say, it instilled in me a work ethic of which I am very blessed, I guess, to have developed, right? So working hard was a thing that at 14, 15 became just part of what you do. It also led to a great relationship with my father. It also led to skill sets. I literally yesterday was painting a guy's house, and last week during the Thanksgiving break, painted a lady's house. Like, my side hustle is public philosophy. The side hustle that pays for that side hustle is painting houses, right? And I learned to do this as a kid. So work ethic, firstborn, lots of stress and anxiety and pressure in my family due to medical realities, lost jobs, etc., led to me having, I think, an overdeveloped sense of if I just work hard enough, I can figure this out. I can get through this. And so that carried me. Yeah. Yep. You just work hard. Oh, this is tough. Do more, right? And it will get you, I think, lots of good things. Like I feel blessed to have developed that. But in college, I did well. I got good grades. I also toured playing professional drums, went to grad school, did well, was honored to, be able to pursue a PhD, did that. But the whole way along, I became so goal oriented that it was about, if only I can get this next thing done, then I'll be able to kind of go fishing more often, right? And in fact, as I talk about in the book, I got my PhD so that I could go fishing. My dad at the time, he thankfully became a professor again later in his life. His kind of earlier status was restored. And my senior year, we fished like 80, 90 days. It was amazing. I was like, yes, I want that job. I want to go trout fishing and get paid for it. I didn't understand that he had tenure and, all these things that were just these weird words. And so I got my PhD and then proceeded to, all right, now I've got to get a job. Now I've got to get a tenure track job. Now I've got to make sure I get a book published. Now I've got to make sure that I'm getting recognized in the field. Now I've got to get, every time was, what's the next thing, next thing, next thing, next thing. And at no point, because of this sense of, just work hard and this is what excellence looks like, et cetera, at no point did I ever feel like I was a workaholic. Did I ever feel like I was abandoning my family for the paycheck? At no point did I feel like I was getting my identity from these accomplishments. Instead, I would have narrated all of it as, no, my identity is I'm a philosopher. This is what philosophers do. Let's go be good at it. And all of that is awesome, right? The problem is it led to 20 years of me telling my wife, if only I can get this article done, then we'll take vacation. If only I can get this next position, then we'll be able to slow down. If only I can do this, then we'll. And I went 20 years without a vacation. And I fished a handful of times in 20 years. And I eventually had a cot in my office where I would sleep most nights because I could just work until I fell over and then get back up and keep working. And it came with some benefit. I've published a lot, right? So there's a side to this with, that's why I've got a dozen books and hundreds of articles and stuff, right? So there was a kind of outcome that I don't think was bad, but my son was, I forget what I say in the book, 5, 6 years old. And, we're driving by Furman and he tells my mom, his grandma, look, grandma, that's Furman. That's where daddy lives. And then a few years later, we're walking down the street and he says, hold my hand. He's like, Dad, I don't want to be a philosopher. And I'm like, what? We're the coolest. That's so crazy, man. We're so slick. And he says, no, philosophers don't spend time with their kids. And gut punch, right? And you'd think it sucks so bad. And all of this, you'd think I would immediately change. I would immediately switch gears. I would immediately transform. But instead, what I kept telling myself, and again, this is where our habits dictate our, identity, how we live. He just doesn't understand I'm doing all of this for him. He doesn't understand this is what working this hard is what lets my wife be able to stay home. It's why he then has, such a great home life. It's like all of it was because I love my family. I'm working this hard. And, then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, the normal couldn't be sustained. The everyday, the habit, the embodied inertia was broken. And you couldn't go to the office. I couldn't not see my son and not see my wife. And so eventually what I realized was, wow, everything I've been telling my students, everything I've been saying in my articles, everything I've been advocating in my books, I've not been putting into practice. Now, I still think I was seeking excellence. I think I was working hard, all still good things. But I had done this at a cost I hadn't really been honest enough to take seriously. And so I thought, you know what? I'm going to buy camping gear and go fishing and take my son fishing. And we did. And so for a year, we didn't see any other humans, but man, we saw a lot of waterfalls. And it was fantastic. And virtual school made it possible for my son to get up in the morning and we would, log on to Wi-Fi and he would go in and do his work for an hour and then we would go hiking. And then we would go on icicle hunts. And then we would go on bike rides. Like it was just better. Now I recognize, and I say this in the book, part of why I was able to do that is my job wasn't delivering groceries to people as part of Instacart. My job was not delivering Amazon packages. My job was not, ensuring that people were getting their vaccines and working at the lab to make sure that people were going to live rather than die. So I was very blessed to be in a position that made possible the kind of flexibility into which I could live. But the thing that was more important than just that flexibility was the awareness that this was a priority that was up to me to make happen. And so I wrote a book literally on top of mountains, The Camping with Kierkegaard, not for a big audience, but for my son. I wrote the book because, as Anne Lamott says somewhere about her father, she says that my dad wrote books and books and books about knowledge, but he never wrote a book of wisdom. And that kind of pricked me and was like, wow, what is it I want my son to know? And it's stuff like, I want him to be kind. I don't care if he's rich, right? I want him to realize that he's okay even when stuff's not. I want him to recognize that avoiding risk is just as risky. That sitting at home protecting yourself may also be a mode of failing to do things that would have been amazing. At the same time, not caring about people next door and running, I'm talking to a pastor, running to church when what we should have been was showing neighbor love by not going to church. Like, all of that makes life hard and complicated. And so what I'm now trying to do is switch my academic work to a public engagement that says, look, unless we have a vision of moral dignity that equalizes us all as vulnerable and relational beings, we are screwed. And so in a contentious political environment, in a difficult economy, in all kinds of frustrating spaces that we inhabit, despair is tempting. The only way despair does not override is if we are able to say joy remains possible. What does it look like to make that a practice? And so my students, every single class, I require them on their to-do lists because they're all overscheduled and overstressed. Like, all right, since I can't get you to stop doing that, I want to add 3 things to your daily to-do list. One is do something today just because it brings me joy. Do something today just because it's awesome. And do something today because it matters. And it turns out those 3 things often will be the same thing, right? And they might even look like studying for an exam because you love that content and you care about we don't have to see this just as eating cheesecake on the side. It might just be rethinking, oh, I've got to write this article. I love what I get to do. This is fantastic. Don't love it all the time, but how can I approach this with an attitude that lets me realize life is short, finitude is real, so what's worthy of that time? And just as a little teeny example of how I think that plays out, my students now, you've probably seen this too from staff or whatever, right? Where they'll reach out and send an email. Hey, do you mind if I miss this meeting coming up or I miss this class? I've got something else, Is that okay? Right? Notice what they're doing in that language. They are refusing to own the existential agency that attends their finitude. They're saying, can you please make this decision for me so that there's no risk I have to inhabit? And so my students all now know you do not get to ask my permission. You tell me what you've chosen matters. Sorry, Dr. Simmons, not coming to class on Tuesday. It's my 1-year anniversary with my girlfriend. We're going to the beach. It's worth my finitude. And the response back from me is, that's amazing. Congrats. How wonderful. I think that's the right choice. It's also not excused, right? Like, consequences are still real, right? But own it, live into that. And that's kind of where my story, my history, it's not radically unique, but I do think that maybe encouraging others to say, you have more agency than you realize and then let's work together to create structures and social frameworks that make that agency possible for everyone. That's the task.
I don't know if it's not you. I mean, I think your story is not unique in that we all go through patterns of life. We all get stuck in ruts. We all have moments that call us to wake up. The question really, I think what makes it unique is that you woke up to it, or you responded to it. As I reading your text, I mean, of course, Kierkegaard is a constant companion, but you have a lot of other philosophers that you walk with, that you're hiking with. They're helping you think about life.
My cloud of witnesses, as my Pentecostal roots name it. That's right.
Preach it. Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, as I'm thinking about them, and I'm thinking about how each of their thinking, at least one thing that is the common thread is that they're not simply questions about just abstract questions about the cosmos or life or something. It's a philosophy that gets under your skin and questions the kind of creature that you are so that you would live in a particular way. And they might have different shades of glosses on that, but they embody that kind of question of wisdom. So really, you probably got into being a philosopher because that's what interested you, not just the journals and the tenure. But it's interesting how we sort of can move away from the content. So I'm saying all that because I'm also a theologian, and I had a near-death reality. For 2 years I was very sick with liver disease, and I had a liver transplant last year. And I keep reflecting out loud, and I have on this podcast about lessons I've learned, and none of it seems to me particularly or profound. It all seems like stuff I already knew. But the difference is I know it in a different way. So the head knowledge is stuff I knew before. I am now more quote unquote Kierkegaardian in my life after it, right? And so that's what I'm seeing in your book, and that's what I'm really appreciating is how you're taking that with you. Now, as you walk with Kierkegaard, you walk up the mountain with him to places of silence and solitude where he reflects on the quiet, right? He writes beautifully. And there's something he says, I think you quote him, if I'm not mistaken, this is a good place to be. Is it a quote by him or by you? Did I miss?
Yep.
Let's think about that for a second. I wanted to talk about that in light of our world, because your companions, your cloud of witnesses speak to our culture, if our culture is ready to listen, a culture of doom scrolling, binge watching, idle entertainment, right? And also the desire for something else always, somewhere else, something more always. Here is Kierkegaard saying, this is a good place to be. And it strikes me as so countercultural.
Yeah, absolutely. I got a text from a friend of mine. We're actually pretty close, but it's one of these weird things where we've only actually met in person one time. And it was because he had seen or heard me on podcasts and reached out, on what used to be Twitter. And I responded, and we, created a little relationship. And then we actually met each other in person when I was keynoting the Homebrewed Christianity Theology Beer Camp event a few years ago. And so we've stayed in touch ever since. But it's fascinating because that line, this is a good place to be, which Kierkegaard says as a kind of attempt to invite us to reflect in the same way Nietzsche does on, if someone shows up and says, hey, you've got to repeat this day, this decision, this reality for all of eternity. Do you look and say, thou art a god, or do you curse him as a demon? Right? Like, what, there's that great line in Groundhog Day where Bill Murray is like just in one of the moments of despair. And he was like, why couldn't this have been that day on the beach where I met that person? And that was a good day. But I'm stuck in Punxsutawney, Philadelphia, in the middle of snow. Oh, right. And that idea that this is a good place to be, this is a good day. Yes, I would will this continuously, this space I am in, even if it turns out there's stuff about it that I would change, right? So again, none of this is a perfectionism. It's just, are you okay even if stuff's not, right? And so my buddy, his name's Jimmy, texted me, it's been months ago now, but he texted me a picture. I forget if it was like his feet in the sand or something. Anyway, he was with a new girlfriend. They were, and he had been divorced and raising 2 kids. And so again, a complicated thing. So the fact that he was with this new woman was this kind of real moment of, look, things are good right now. Right. And so he's out there and he said, he sent me this picture and he just said, we just read that passage together sitting here. Thanks. And I'm like, man, like that's so cool. And it wasn't even thanking me so much as more as just, I was trying to invite people to realize what philosophers have been handing us for thousands of years if we would slow down and pay attention. None of them are telling you, I've got life figured out. What they're telling you, though, is, hey, here's what I'm struggling with in life. Maybe you are too. We can do better. Kierkegaard, miserable human being, right? A sad sack. And yet, for him to say, this is a good place to be, that resonates to me because it's one thing if whatever, Tom Hanks or something says, what a good place to be, sitting in Maui, taking an Instagram photo. But for Kierkegaard, who loses the love of his life, suffers from physical ailment the entire existence, dies at 42 years old, ends up with complicated relationships with his parents. I mean, just mocked by his peers, never lands the career he wanted, didn't have, in some ways, the ability to move into the life that he hoped would be the case, being a country pastor out in the fields. That guy saying, you know what, this is a good place. I'm all right. And that, for me, resounds in my soul. And it reminds me of what the Jewish philosopher Emmanuel Levinas says, is that we must not just know, like in our heads, in our brains. We must, he says, know in our bones.
Know in our bones, yeah.
Know in our bones.
Well, for the listener who's not studied Kierkegaard much, Groundhog Day is a movie that quite famously takes on some Kierkegaardian philosophy. It doesn't tell you what's happening, but it's a great way to illustrate several of the life stages. And if you don't like the movie, or if you haven't seen it, you should watch it because you'll like the movie.
It also reminds us, whenever we have groundhogs driving, remind them not to drive angry.
That's right. Well,
don't drive angry.
It reminds me of a Wendell Berry line. I think it's not about place as much as it is about resource and need, where it's like, I think the line is like, we have everything we need is already here. And that's how I feel about place. So much of my life, I would receive compliments from people who would say, you're going somewhere. And I would read Kierkegaard and I started saying to them in reply, I'd say, how come this isn't already I'm already somewhere. Why isn't this? And even though I would say that as a witty retort to them, I've tried to learn that more and more and more, because it's not just that I'm on the beach, right? But I mean, I am alive, right? And more often than not, my existence is probably pretty good. So what does it mean to like embody and accept with gratitude where I am, and not just, pardon me, but piss it away for wanting of something else, because that's a target that moves and you never hit it.
Yeah. Anne Lamott has this great line in her book, Almost Everything, where she says, we have all we need to come through. All right, which is such a cool line. And then elsewhere, she says, the best name for God is not me. And then the best advice that she can give, and she draws this from Emerson, if I remember right, the best advice is go outside and look up. Right? It's like, man, like that's sufficient. Now, does that address healthcare disparities and income inequality and misogyny? No. Like, of course, we have social realities that we've then got to go take care of, so that that ability to go outside and look up is the same for everyone. We all get to do that, right? So the critique of the book that I hear most often, which is understandable and I think unfair. It's understandable because the critique is easy for you to say you're a full professor. Easy for you to say you're already on the other side of things. Easy for you to say, right? And I'm like, look, I get it. It's unfair because the human condition is not something that is different because of our station, our status, our privilege, or our existential realities attending to social life. However, the existential realities, the embodied material circumstances of our social existence deeply impact the way in which we are invited to live into that condition, right? We are all vulnerable, but it turns out, if you're a person of color, you are more vulnerable because the healthcare disparities cut against you. We're all relational, but it turns out that if you find yourself economically advantaged, your relationships are with people who have social power to open doors for the people you love, right? Like those are things we've got to figure out and address and work toward. But unless we have that existential anchor, I think we can lose sight of why we work toward those things in the first place.
I don't agree with the criticism. I think that might just be because people have to come up with a critique. And the reason why I would jump off and say that is because, the very simple and unnuanced criticism of any existential thought is that it's too individualistic or something to that effect, which is, my favorite work by Kierkegaard, or the one that shaped me the most, and I have not read every word of his by any stretch, but it's Works of Love. And in Works of Love, how that has shaped my imagination for how to love your neighbor is profound. So it's not just about me in that text or so many other texts. But when I'm reading this, you keep bringing up concepts that talk about social justice, systems. So I don't think that's fair at all. In fact, what are you talking here about? There's a couple different concepts that you pull out that I found incredibly helpful. You talk about being alone. We're never ethically alone. We may be, what's the other? I don't have it off the top of my head. We may be empirically alone. I may be alone. But therein lies, going back to like basic Christian spirituality, solitude isn't a stance against community, right? We practice solitude to learn how to be in community, right? So I might be empirically alone, but I'm not ethically alone. I take people with me where I go. Or is it Levinas, you pull out, you're talking about, maybe I'm about the wrong person or is it might be someone else. Like when someone says, "Hey, you" to you, right? Yeah, the call, right? We are socially embedded creatures. And I keep throughout, and this is maybe a little too obscure for maybe this discipline conversation, but throughout I keep reading about your text and what you're saying in light of Charles Taylor's The Age of Authenticity, and how in our current day authenticity is like the thing for people's mindsets, and how challenging it is because it's when you make that more of a popular level expression, it means you do you. You self-express, you identify yourself outward, and it doesn't really have a whole lot of patience for being defined by a community or a tradition. Existentialism appears like it would go into that stream, although, as you demonstrated here, it really doesn't. Because it asks you to ask about your finitude in existence in light of other people. It asks you the way you relate, to think through how you relate to others and systems. And so I think you pull up nicely and talk about issues that are more public. Yeah, I do. And that's in your heart.
I appreciate it. Because, it is. And that's the thing, like when I wrote the book and when I've given a couple book tours and you speak about it a lot now. And the thing that I always want people to take away from it is nothing in the book is saying, hey, in order to find joy, quit your job and head to the mountains, right? Like that's a really bad set of advice. The advice is don't miss the opportunities for joy, awesomeness, and meaning, whatever the circumstances are today, right? And that can, again, sound, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but it can sound self-helpy. But it was so interesting to me when I tried to get the book published, I kept hearing from editors, well, we don't know how to market this because it's just a self-help book, but it's too philosophical. And I kept coming back saying, because it's not a self-help book, it's a book about existential philosophy and the importance of agency relative to meaning making. And like, yeah. That's why we don't know how to sell that, man. And so I've been absolutely enthused, I guess, by the reception the book has gotten. because I published it with a boutique press, which means zero marketing. 100% of it was me trying, basically like the DIY punk band that's kind of in my soul. It's like we're going and giving talks and selling, CDs out of the back of the trunk, right? Like that's how I've moved this book. And it's been so interesting that it recently got listed by the next big idea club, which is this Malcolm Gladwell, Adam Grant kind of group up in New York. They listed it as one of the 6 books you could read in a day that will change your life. Isn't that cool? And again, like there's not to pat myself on the back, but this idea that, see, I told those editors, philosophy, when presented in ways that are inviting, is transformative. The problem is we live in such a success-driven culture that, and they kept telling me this, if you had 100,000 followers on Substack, we would publish your book because we really enjoyed it here at the publishing house. But we don't see you having a big enough audience. And my thought was, yeah, but the whole point is to raise the audience for Kierkegaard and people reading Anne Lamott, but who also maybe should be listening to Levinas, and people who love Kendrick Lamar, but need to recognize that his idea of humility is actually grounded in Aristotle and Socrates, and like finding ways to do this. And then my choice, hey, I'm going to go fishing. I'm going to go mountain biking. I freaking love that stuff. For someone else, as my friend Wendy Farley, an amazing, amazing queer feminist writer, puts it, sometimes all we need for joy is to be able to give ourselves the permission to sit in our car until our song finishes before going into the office. Right? Like that's so human. We know what that feels like, right? And the ability to say, you know what, I can be a minute late and the world will not stop. And my boss does not need to see that as a reason for critique, because we are, as Lamott quotes Ram Dass, in the end, walking each other home. And so I often will ask my students things like, all right, you've got 5 minutes to live. What's the song you put on the radio? The meteor's coming. Like, how you going to go out? And it's so interesting when I ask them that question, because some, do the Louis Armstrong, What a Wonderful World kind of, pensive thing, right? Which makes tons of sense and is kind of a, like that great Pixie song at the end of Fight Club when everything's falling down. Like that's one option. But what's so cool is how many of them give me songs you can dance to. And I'm like, yes, that's Nietzsche's point. I don't want just a God who weeps. I want a God who laughs and dances. And being able to realize the weeping matters because that's solidarity in the human condition. But laughter and dancing is also the joy that the human condition makes possible. And too many Christians walk around feeling oppressed and overwhelmed and anxious and just, downtrodden, and forget that the yoke is easy and the burden is light. Or they walk around thinking the yoke is easy and the burden is light just means get yourself a fancy 401k, really good private health insurance, and then mock poor people and immigrants because they've not worked as hard as you have. Like, both of those are horrifying ways of making sense of a relational conception of God, fundamentally invested in the human condition as not something to escape, but something to embrace and get good at doing together. And that's where Bonhoeffer and Life Together starts singing to me, right? That's where the reality of Martin Luther King saying, I have a dream, but I may not get to that mountaintop, right? Like, this is about more than me. This is where Maya Angelou coming in saying they'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. Like, this is Simone Weil dying from starvation-related complications because of solidarity with the working class in the name of God, right? Finding a way to realize life is so much more compelling than the consumer model of success and achievement could ever possibly offer. Doesn't mean that you don't go out and achieve, right? Get your PhD, read the book, study, like do the stuff, but realize what matters is that you're okay with having lived that way.
I love that.
And man, that's compelling to me, right?
I find the way of thinking useful and also right. And I'm sorry that the publishers gave you a bit of a hard time. I prefer what you're trying to do more than what I'm seeing by the resurgence of interest in Stoicism. Now, I think Stoicism is fascinating. In fact, to me, the best Stoicism is just kind of like wisdom literature in the scriptures, or a lot of what I love about the Buddhist tradition. To me, wisdom is wisdom. If it can help you live your life better, it's great. But so much of it is utilized in a sort of capitalistic, success-driven milieu that we were talking about. The questions that you're engaging because of the philosophers that you're reading and the way you're going about it is pressing so much below those surface level interests that I think it's possible for transformation.
I appreciate that.
Hey, Alan's with us now. Our producer is back from playing music. Alan, this is Aaron. Aaron, this is Alan. Both of you professors.
What's up, Alan? I hear you're a musician. We got to get a band together and go on the road.
That would be preferable to what I just experienced.
Well, I was a session drummer for a long time before going into philosophy. And in fact, I have had people who know me really well who've like sat in on my classes and stuff. They say the two things that like would help students get ready for one of my classes is to attend Pentecostal worship services and then go to a hardcore show.
Oh, nice.
And I'm
nice.
like, I will take both of those.
I love that.
I'm in for both of them.
Okay. Well, listen, because I want to be mindful of your time, I have several questions I want to fire off at you, if you don't mind. And it's been such a pleasure to hear from you, to talk with you more. But here's a question for you. If a meteor's hitting the Earth and you got 5 minutes, what song are you playing?
Oh, it's such a good question. So my answer is the 59 Sound by Gaslight Anthem. And the reason is because it's a song, watch this meta move, philosophers are such nerds. It's a song about what song will be playing when you go. And it's also, though, like kind of Bruce Springsteen meets some punk sensibilities, and it's just fantastic. But the 59 Sound by Gaslight Anthem.
Nice.
Okay. What's your favorite work by Kierkegaard?
Oh, my favorite work by Kierkegaard is either Judge for Yourself, Self-Examination. It's a collection of edifying discourses, or his book, Practicing Christianity. The reason I love Practicing Christianity is because he lays out the distinction between the church militant and the church triumphant.
Yes.
And I am a big fan of his critique of what we today would call the kind of triumphalism of people thinking that political power is the mode in which Christian witness is best articulated. I am not a pastor, so listeners will forgive me, but basically Practicing Christianity gives us the best critique of contemporary white American nationalist evangelicals that I think has ever been written. The other book, for Self-Examination and Judge for Yourself, that set of essays is just amazing because the whole thing frames what it looks like to take yourself up as challenged by the example of Christ. And that sense is something, again, this idea of being self-denying is powerfully presented. And I think it would be the best companion book to Kendrick Lamar's track Humble.
Okay. Well, if someone were starting out to read, they wanted to read Kierkegaard. I mean, because I always tell people, look, his authorship, he's got two of them. He's got one, got a pseudonymous thing. It's a creative thing. I always tell people, indirect communication. So you have to learn that he's coming in the back door. He's arguing for points and against points that he wants you to accept. I mean, so it's confusing. And then he's got a straightforward, more authorship with his name, and he's written a ton. He's hugely prolific. But if you're telling someone, hey, you want to read Kierkegaard, here's where you can start. What would you tell them, Professor?
I actually think that for Self-Examination would probably be my recommendation because it's shorter, it's pithier. You can kind of pick up on things. Practice Christianity is too big for that. I also kind of like his little book just called Purity of Heart, Just to Will One Thing.
Yeah. Yep.
That was actually published with other things originally, but it's come out now as a single book. I think that book is actually really compelling. I wrote an essay a few years ago about it where the whole idea is it's not saying that you have to choose only one thing. It's you've got to choose what will ultimately be the standard of meaning and value by which you make other choices. And this is effectively the Bob Dylan, right? You got to choose someone. You got to worship somebody.
Got to serve somebody. Right.
And so that point, the book about purity of heart, I think, kind of gets at some of that in some compelling ways. I would not recommend the places that everybody starts. I think Fear and Trembling is a horrible place to start, even though it's where I often start my students. I think Sickness Unto Death is even worse because it's got the most opaque line in all of philosophy about the self being the spirit, and the spirit is a synthesis, and a self that relates itself to itself. And
Right.
Well, so all those are amazing, and those are where these big ideas in Kierkegaard come out. But I actually think I would start with his signed late stuff, defending kind of his personal take on what it looks like to try his best to become a Christian.
What if this is maybe a silly question, or maybe one that we'll try it out. What spiritual discipline or practice would be most Kierkegaardian, or what is something that comes from the philosophy thing of Kierkegaard that folds right into a practice that we may know by another name?
Wow. I think I would say self-denial, humility, and those are, I'm not sure those are necessarily practices, but I think they should be.
Right. Well, asceticism, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't want to be an ascetic, right? Like, I think self-denial is from Kierkegaard out the gate, right? That's why I think he has to write under pseudonyms. It's about taking seriously that your own perspective is almost always stated. It's all-consuming. We've got to be good at being able to occupy different spaces, different ways of life, making sense of different things. And then toward the end of his life, he almost becomes misanthropic in some ways. And I think a lot of that is connected to the idea that when you really cultivate this sense of awareness about, as he puts it, that in relation to God, you're always wrong, that you can very quickly just get frustrated by all the people who aren't even interested in taking that seriously, right? So like, though I hope spending time in the mountains makes me better at coming back into society, like that's part of why I do it. I can definitely grade papers without being angry at my students once I've ridden bikes the day before. However, man, you come down from the mountains and like roll into a Walmart parking lot, it's hard to like humanity.
Yeah, right.
So I think Kierkegaard kind of wrestles with that. But the best place, this is a weird thing to say maybe, the best way I would say for people to see what this Kierkegaardian spiritual practice would look like, don't read Kierkegaard, go read David Foster Wallace's This Is Water.
Oh, yeah, of course.
That would be where I would say, if you want to see what it looks like to make a spiritual practice of self-denial in appropriate ways, right, which is also anchored in appropriate self-love, go read This Is Water, or shoot, go to YouTube, just type in This Is Water full speech, and in 20 minutes, you can hear the entire thing read by Wallace.
Right.
And that I absolutely think is what it looks like to enact Kierkegaardian spiritual practice.
All right, couple more recommendations from you. Sometimes we ask for recommendations, like, is there a book or author, a television show, an album, something just that you recommend? And it could be for any reason.
Yeah.
Maybe it's spiritual, maybe it's Kierkegaardian, or maybe it's just you think people need to know about it.
It probably won't be very deep. Everyone should go watch all of Frasier, Wings, and Cheers. Because those are the best 3 shows that have ever been offered to humanity.
Same universe.
Second, if you are a student of mine or any other professor in their 40s, please, for the love of God, go watch all of Seinfeld, because then all of our examples will make sense again. And for everyone who is looking for I'll give you 2 more recommendations. The show I'm currently watching right now and I'm addicted to is actually an old TV show, mid 2000s, called Elementary. And it's on Amazon right now, but it's the Sherlock Holmes as recovering heroin addict and Lucy Liu as Dr. Watson, who's his partner. And that show, it's just written brilliantly. The characters are amazing. Not a show for, young kids, but that show for people who are kind of wanting to think. Elementary on Amazon right now is fantastic. And music, the recommendation I'd give people since we're entering the holiday season, best Christmas album I think in existence is actually by a buddy of mine, J. Roddy Woolston, has a new album out called Christmas to the Bone. And it is fantastic. If you wanted to hear what the Black Crowes doing Christmas songs that are all originals sound like, J. Roddy Woolston, Christmas to the Bone. Vinyl just got released about a week ago. The thing is absolutely fantastic. Check that out.
Wow, that's so great. Listen, J. Aaron Simmons, professor, Furman, camping with Kierkegaard, faithfulness is a way of life. Hiker, camper, father, fisherman, friend, husband, drummer. It's been a joy and a delight to be with you. God bless you.
Oh my gosh.
And friends, we'll see you on the next time. Take care.
Thank you.